今天下午呢，请到了荷兰大学的教授 Uwe Pohl 教授，然后由他来为大家分享他的一些教学和管理经验，在语言这方面。所以呢，然后下午的整个主场的整个主持呢，我交给我的同事由刘宇老师来代为主持请大家希望大家可以配合然后刘宇老师英语也很好所以就是沟通起来更方便，也希望大家能够积极的抓住这个机会。第一轮是讲，第二轮是工作坊的形式，所以希望大家利用这种好的机会跟教授的一个交流。好，下面请刘宇老师。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm presenting Dr. Uwe Pohl, who is a German-born teacher educator in the Department of English Language Pedagogy at Alta University. He's a senior lecturer in language pedagogy and applied linguistics with a particular interest in the areas of ELT methodology. English as medium of instruction, intercultural communication, mentoring, and trainer training. Uwe Pohl teaches in the BA, MA, and PhD programs of the School of English and American Studies, and is currently the Dean's Faculty of Faculty Commissioner for International Students. So the topic Dr. Uwe Pohl is gonna present is Growing Trees, Developing as a Language Teacher. Let's welcome Dr. Uwe Pohl.
Thanks. This was a very warm welcome. Ni hao. This is as much as I could say in Chinese. I'm really flattered to be here as somebody who doesn't speak Chinese and knows very little about teaching Chinese. So when I was asked to talk to you today, I was thinking about what it is that I could talk to you about that would interest you. And well, one of the things that has always been with me is the development of teachers, because as you've just heard, my main work is with language teachers, with teachers of English, and beginner teachers, so people who are just starting out that long, long road that is, in a way, never ending to becoming good teachers of English in this case. So I hope what I have to say to you will be interesting. I'm also aware of the fact that you've just had lunch. You know, in English, they call it the post-lunch syndrome. So I'm sure I will see a couple of eyes sort of going a little dark. From time to time, if you allow me, I will sort of move this talk into a space where we have a chance, where you have a chance to talk a little bit yourselves. In part because I think that is good methodology, and in part because I'd like to keep you with me, okay? So the title of the talk is Growing Trees, Developing as a Teacher. I know one thing about China and the Chinese colleagues that I've worked with, they love metaphors, and so do I. And developing as a teacher in many ways, when I thought about it long and hard, is a little bit like growing trees. Actually, there's a double meaning here. Growing trees means you grow trees, and growing trees means trees are growing. And I think that's nice because you can grow trees, but you can't make them grow. And you can't grow teachers. You can help them grow. So there's something in the development aspect of all teachers, I would say, that reminds me very much of trees. So the tree metaphor will be with us all the way through the talk. And I will talk about why I think it's a very good metaphor for teacher development. It's going to be quite a personal exploration. don't worry, it's not just all about me, but I would like to start with myself for a particular reason. So here you see the 6-year-old me. And the 6-year-old me did not want to become a teacher, or a teacher of English for that matter. I wanted to become a diver. I thought, I love water, I love animals, and I thought, you know, if somebody paid me to be in the water with animals, research them, look after them, that would be me. Well, I didn't become a diver, but an English teacher and trainer. But I will come back to the point in a minute, because it seems to me the roots of ourselves as teachers of English or teachers of Chinese are way back, way before you even started getting formal training for becoming a teacher of Chinese in this case. So can we just have a little test here? Can you raise your hand if, as a child, let's say 6 to 8 to 10, you wanted to become a teacher? Not too many. I'm just looking around. Okay. Can you just take literally a minute? I will call you back, and just turn to the person next to you and tell them what you did want to become when you were a child. 1 minute. Just find a couple. I have a feeling. I think I need to introduce a sign system. So when you see me raise my hand, you also raise your hand, okay? So that we get a ripple effect, and then don't have to shout down the microphone. I have a feeling I could let you talk for 10 minutes and that would be just fine, but I won't, of course. So I just wanted to give you a kind of start a little bit further back in our lives, and I come back to why that is important in a minute. Let me give you an overview of what I have prepared and what I would like to say by way of analogy with those trees. Well, this is university, so we need a definition, right? I mean, you can't talk about teacher development. There's zillions of definitions. I've chosen one for a reason, because it resonates for me very well with the what I find important about teacher development and with the tree metaphor. I will also talk a little bit, not too much, about some models of teacher development that I think are useful. I'm not saying they're the whole story. This is the beauty of the tree thing. They tell part of the story about what it means to develop as a teacher. They're useful. And I will mention some briefly. And as I move along, I might go back to one or two and sort of put a little bit of flesh on the theory when it matters more. One very interesting, more recent insight comes from positive psychology. It's something called signature strengths, and it takes us right back to that little guy and the kind of values and personal strengths that we have as people, and how that matters for the kind of jobs or work we choose. So I'll talk about that a little bit. Now, one other area that I think is key in understanding teacher development is the notion of formative experience. Now, formative means powerful, really, here. Undergoing for a certain amount of time, not just on a one-day thing, a particular type of experience that leaves you changed. Okay. So that'll be something to talk about. When we develop, we hardly ever develop alone. And one area, again, that's receiving more and more attention, and I think rightly so, is to see ourselves as teachers as part of a wider professional community. Now, that could be your department, the university, but perhaps the community of Chinese teachers in your case, in a particular country. One area that's very often overlooked by, I would say, by theoreticians who deal with models of teacher development is what we call in German Entwicklungssprung. It means a developmental leap that sometimes miraculously you can develop very fast. Not just, you don't need 10 years or 15 years to get better at what you're doing or to change what you're doing. Sometimes there is something that allows you to see everything differently. And a good way of calling this something is a transformational moment. It literally transforms your knowledge, your insight, your awareness of yourself. So I want to talk about that too. Another area is that as much as we don't like it, we are very often challenged. And very often we don't want that challenge, but it's there anyway. But it's also an opportunity. And how we see that challenge, it's very much a perception thing. How we respond to it may actually be a very good thing, because it allows us to develop, to move out of our comfort zone, as it were, and into a new area of thinking and a new area of practice. And finally, and again, that's an area that I'm happy to say is receiving more attention internationally these days, is teacher well-being. And the fact that our bodies, just like trees, signal when they are not well. And teachers are the worst people to look after those signals. They look after other people. And yet our bodies actually tell us something's not right. You need to look after yourself, pay attention to how you feel, how you are. So I'd like to finish with a sort of a little attention marker at the end and let you go with a bit of thought on that point. Okay, now I've talked long enough. A quick task for you. Before I show you the definition that I said I like, how would you continue the sentence in one sentence? Teacher development is, don't make it a very long sentence, but with the person that you've just talked to, what do you think you would say? Teacher development is endless. Okay. Yeah, you can also shout in if you would like. Okay, that's almost endless. Any other ideas? Aha, so it's actually not a line so much, but more circular, a cycle of sorts. Okay, good, brilliant, nice. Well, here's my definition. Just have a look, the one that I chose. So you have your, the continual is all the endless and the cyclical and the ongoing. What I like here is actually it's a holistic term. So we may want to talk about how intellectually, in terms of our thinking about teaching and learning, how we grow, but it is very much tied in with how we experience teaching and learning. And perhaps just as important, are we growing in terms of our attitudes towards ourselves, towards our learners, towards schools and teaching? So it's a process, as I've highlighted it here, that brings together a number of things. And I would say, again, just like a tree, if one of them gets affected, everything else tends to get affected, positively or negatively. Okay, Very briefly, just a sort of a grand tour of some models of teacher development that I said were useful, and maybe in combination, they help us understand better what this very short definition hints at. There are a number of models that say, well, whatever there is, you know, you need to have experience. It seems kind of very obvious, you know, if you don't teach, you're not likely to be a good teacher. If you don't teach for a certain amount of time, you're not developing. True. But it's also true, I think there's the old joke about, you know, somebody has 30 years of experience, but only developed 1 year. If you don't do something with that experience, just going through it may not take you all that far. Okay, so yes, there's a primacy of experience, but as teachers who want to develop, something's got to happen with that experience to make it actually valuable, to make it a resource. There are many more models that sort of suggest a kind of sequence, stages, and that's again, you can sort of predict, and I see that very clearly even with my beginner teachers now, a certain, you know, sequence of what happens and how you feel when you start out, and how you begin to develop, how you get better, hopefully, at what you're doing, what motivates you to change what you're doing, and where you're looking to go when you are an experienced teacher. True, but as you just said, I think it's more of a cyclical thing. If it's open-ended, then there's no such thing as a fully developed, never anymore developing teacher. And sometimes these stages suggest otherwise, as though, you know, you move from novice to expert. And if you're an expert, you've got nowhere to go. I don't think that's true. So we have to take that with a pinch of salt. A very powerful model that's been used a lot, it does actually come from ethnography, is what Wenger called community of practice, and learning or participating in it. So his big thing is that when we start learning any practice, any professional practice, we come in from the periphery, and we are watching and working with people in the inner side of the community. And by basically learning the craft, by observing, by being with them, we move closer to the selected one, the core, the ones who know and can do. And that's useful too. I'm not so sure I like peripheral, because even my beginner teachers, I wouldn't call peripheral, but I see what he means by peripheral as a position in a particular community of practitioners. A very good model, I think, that, again, it takes heed that these things are cyclical, is Huberman's life cycle of teachers, and I come back to it in a moment because I think it's a good one for our purpose today to spend a little bit more time on. So I won't say much more here, but go right into it. So Huberman was interested in novice and mid-career and late career teachers, and based on his work, some sort of stages were suggested, but they don't necessarily mean that they're always sequential. Phase one is in at the deep end. No lifeguard on duty. I mean, that's, you start out as a teacher, you're thrown in, and somebody says, teach this group, or teach this student. You know something about teaching, but you've never taught, or very little. So it's sink or swim. Not a very nice experience, for some shorter, for some longer. But survival is the key, all right? Very often it also means if there is there's an institution involved, that you need to get used to your other colleagues, to the institution. So it's not just about learning to swim in teaching, but learning to swim as a colleague, as somebody who works with others in a particular institution. But there is something to it, which is why I said, you know, peripheral is not a nice word. Our young teachers and our beginning teachers have a very fresh view and sometimes say, well, why should I teach that way? And I'd say, well, because we've always taught that way. And it's really refreshing to have that kind of energy and focus and a little bit, so what if, in the attitude. Now, you get out of that phase, most people do, most teachers do, and that's, you could call that 2 feet on the ground. You've got your routines. You're no longer jittery, anxious when you get into class and say, okay, the first thing I need to do, the second, it's already habitual. You've developed a certain confidence and competence in teaching. So these routines mean that you can actually deal with several classes, perhaps in different types of students. You're beginning to pay more attention to the students. That's a key thing we notice, that we are at first, our young teachers are so concerned with themselves and the content. And this is the phase where they're beginning to actually notice the differences in the students, and they begin to teach students rather than the material. This mouse is a little slow, so forgive me for that. Ready to tinker. Tinkering is a lovely word in English. I like it a lot. You know, if you tinker with metal, you mess about. You make something, you don't know what it's going to be. Looks like a car, or maybe it becomes something else. You know, so kids tinker, and people who love making stuff tinker. So tinkering is basically a phase where you know your routines, and you're beginning to get curious about doing something different. Maybe it's not using the course book the way you used to. Maybe starting completely differently and see what happens, starting your classes differently. Maybe it's bringing in material, maybe as we have all had online, you know, playing around with apps, even though you're not quite sure you're good at it, but you are curious enough to see what happens if you use it and how your students will respond. So I don't want to put a timeline on it, but tinkering comes usually after about 3 to 4, 5 years of practice. And if you add another 10 years of practice, then most teachers will want to branch out. It's not to say that they're not interested in teaching anymore, but they're looking for a new professional challenge. It could be a course that they're taking. It could be becoming the head of a particular group of people. In our case, very often becoming mentors who guide the new students in a school, or a student who's learning, writing their own materials. So there's a whole range of things that people tend to do as part of keeping a teacher core, but like a tree, developing branches that sustain you in a new way. And obviously that is a very important part of going on to develop and feeling you're not stagnating. So here they are again. Show of hands, just scanning the room. Anybody here who is still in at the deep end in teaching Chinese? Be brave. Okay, 2 feet on the ground. So colleagues said, yeah, so, show yourselves, 2 feet on the ground, you know your stuff. You're kind of okay by now. Okay, that's a quite good number. They're ready to think, whoops, they're ready to, no, not you yet. They're ready to tinker, guy? Okay, and what about the branching out? Anybody who's ready for a new professional, a wider professional challenge? Okay, it's interesting. So we have a good solid middle bit here. Okay, thanks. So I think this is enough for now to kind of get a sense of where you are, where some of the models would put you, and why all these phases are really important, and add to a certain sense of who you are as a teacher personality. So going back to myself at the age of 6, so it is an interesting question that how did this little guy get to be a teacher and trainer? And positive psychology has taken more of an interest in the long view, which is good. And Seligman and a number of his colleagues came up with what is called signature traits or signature strengths that they have explored, investigated, and they came up with 24 such signature strengths. Some are values, some are actually competences that we seem to develop a lot earlier before we make our professional choices. And see if you can see them well enough. That's very small. Maybe I can't open the file. Okay, so they've organized those 24 character strengths or signature strengths in categories like wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, and there's a whole lot, honesty, curiosity, judgment, love of learning, leadership, fairness, that they explain, and in their research show how they, if you have a match with the ones that you identify with, that actually your work allows you to live, then you're a happy person in the job that you do, okay? And I don't know, by the way, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint later as a PDF so you can actually, and also the full list, and you'll see the link. So these broad categories are about a person-work fit. And when I started sort of investigating a little bit for myself, I found an interesting one, which I hadn't thought about so much. By trawling through end of course feedback, there was one theme, and I'm not here to blow my own trumpet, I'm here to just give an example, that seemed to come up all the time. And I thought, well, you know, I'd like to see more of, you taught us so much, but that wasn't the most important thing that students over several, 5, 6, 7 years mentioned. It was actually a signature strength that Seligman called kindness. So there's a sense, and I actually say, yeah, that's actually really true. That is me, I can teach my best if I can reach out to the students, there's a connect, if I notice how they are, both in the way I prepare classes, the way I relate to what they write, what they give me, and the feedback that I provide. But it was still a surprise to me that I thought, yes, maybe that is a signature strength that I have. I have others. And again, as I looked around, I play table tennis. And then I realized, you know, I started playing table tennis way before I wanted to become a teacher, but I learned so much about the strategy of playing. Needless to say that Marlon is my big hero here, the current world champion, about strategy. You have to, you know, think about teaching. You're in the moment, you can't think very much. You can have a strategy, but you also have to respond immediately and confidently. And I'm pretty sure that has had an impact on the way that I learned to be in the classroom. I play the guitar and I sing. And I suddenly realized when I was teaching language, even at university, I tend to bring in songs and use that for language teaching. To me, that seemed automatic. But when I talked to some of my beginner teachers, they said, no, we've got to teach grammar. And so I said, why would you not bring in, if you can sing, if you can play an instrument? I'm a visualizer. So if you came to one of my classes, you would see that there's always a sort of a doodly thing, which again, I felt going back in time, I've been doing for many, many years, and it started early in my teaching career. Now my training, it's here with me as well. I don't mind acting and being silly. As you can see, I borrowed somebody's hair for this activity. So there are actually quite a number of things that that I felt were always there or have been there for a long time, that was sort of the residue, the roots of my teaching and later of my training. And for example, in all the classes when I teach language, there is a strong insistence on learning stress. Not just pronunciation, but stress, because I believe there's such a thing as the music of a language. So wenn ich jetzt Deutsch spreche, dann klingt das völlig anders, als wenn ich Englisch spreche. Ich habe modul beszélek, akkor az még más, teljesen más. Yeah? And English too. And it's interesting that I somehow, once I understood that about English, I made that a regular part of how I teach the language. So just a little experiment with you. I hope you don't mind. It'll wake you up anyway. The thing about English is it's called stress timing. And stress timing is that the stressed syllables always have the same distance. So between one stressed syllable and the next stressed syllable, you always have the same distance. It's quite funny. So for example, can you count with me? Okay, can we count together? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, go on. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, go on. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and then the 2 and the 3 and the 4. 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4. 1 and then a 2, then a 3 and then a 4. 1 and then a 2 and then a 3 and then a 4. Brilliant. You need to learn that, because if you don't, you cannot. So look, the British will never agree to that. 1, 2, 3, 4. The British will never agree to that. 1, 2, magic. So this was an element that I've always, and I felt like it, and I'm sure it comes from my sense of music and the fact that I noticed that. Nobody taught me this initially, but I noticed that, and I found it important in terms of getting a feel for the language that I teach. So just for a moment, is there a music of Chinese? Can you just have a very quick talk with each other? Do you think there's such a thing? Is there something you could do for learners of Chinese to help them with the melody or the something or the rhythm that would help them actually get into the feel of spoken Chinese? Just take a minute. You've forgotten about the hand sign. I think that's homework. Yeah, I think it bears a bit of thinking. Yeah. So, but what I'm saying is that there might be something there, and then if you personally have a fearful Chinese, maybe you find a way of making that part of how you teach about speaking it. Well, I already said that I'm a visualizer too. And when I now train, I make it an important part of the training of the beginning teachers, because they don't realize that. And once in a while, increasingly, there is someone like Fonni, who, when I asked her, when I saw him, said, well, but you were great. I said, yeah, but yeah, I don't think of it. I sometimes do it. And I said, please go on, do what you're doing. For example, with the text that she used with the students, helping them. It was a very dense text, and then helping them by breaking it down like that is key. That's a wonderful way of, teaching. And she thought, really? She didn't think of it as anything special. And I said, please make that a conscious part of how you approach your class, particularly when it comes to processing, reading or listening texts. They're very difficult to get into. Okay, back to you. So, as I said, there are signature strengths that are values, like some of the values that you see that I mentioned. And signature strengths that are characteristics of actually competences that you don't think of as teaching competences necessarily. So my question is, and again, you have a chance to talk. Come on, little machine. Do you have any? I've given you some examples, but it's to do with some of the competences I mentioned, sports related, arts related, values that you think, or strengths that you have that kind of actually are or should be part of your teaching. Have a quick buzz. You personally. No, we don't need to show. We have a science system, so great. I have a feeling, again, there was more to talk about, so maybe you could continue that in the break. I think it might be interesting to see what others have to say here. So we have the roots, as it were. Signature strengths that probably go back a long way without you noticing it. And all I'm saying is pay attention to and maybe revisit some of these and see how they might have influenced or how they might influence your work as a teacher of Chinese. Formative experiences. I already said formative experiences are powerful experiences. Usually when they're powerful, they leave you tired. That's me at the end of my master's course, the final presentation, and it was a group presentation and we were exhausted, but happy because it was an incredible learning experience. In fact, I'll come back to that in a minute because it was actually the whole program that for me was a formative experience, because I was one of 3 European students out of 16 from all over the world. So for 1 year, just like you, we were there together, and it was the learning that was a result of working with people from so many different places so intensely. I cannot describe other than as powerful and formative. But I wouldn't want to start there, but actually with something that a colleague of mine called the ghosts behind the blackboard. I really like that. You see the ghosts up there? Yeah. Mark Almond. Basically, this is what he had to say about it. Yeah, so formative actually also means the formative people in our lives. Again, sometimes as part of our professional career, sometimes much earlier. Maybe some of these people were the very people that were influential in making you want to become a teacher after all, a teacher of Chinese, or it was a particular incident or a particular longer experience that got you there. And so clearly close friends, peer group, families even seem to have that kind of impact that is unbeknownst to us, already putting us on a kind of trajectory in a certain direction. For me, these two tutors that I had on the course in Plymouth, UK, Rob Bolitho and Tony Wright, were very happy ghosts for me, from whom I learned what professional learning, professional teaching, and being a professional means. I didn't think a teacher was a professional until I met them. I thought it's something that you learn like baking, or you learn what I learned through university, but I didn't think of it as a profession. So these two were very influential in that sense for me. But there's a, how shall I put it, a downside to most formative experiences. I'm also training school mentors. And when these experienced teachers come to the university to get training, to become a mentor, to help beginner teachers, very often they go through a very similar process. And it looks a bit like that. So they come, just, you know, remember they are in the way beyond tinkering, branching out. They want to, I'm a good teacher and I want to help someone else. And then we put them through a process and they're beginning to lose it a little. So there's a destabilization because there's ways of teaching or learning all themselves they hadn't considered. One of them described that very nicely in the article that is here. She said, I feel like a tribal healer at the medical university. So there is a, in other words, there is what my ghost teachers told me, there is a sense of what they called constructive destabilization that most formative experience have. So it's not nice necessarily. You go through a redefining process where you see yourself differently and hopefully you come out again, but you are different and you are better in the way you think, in the way you can teach or deal with young teachers as a professional. So just wondering, again, let's keep you, 90 minutes is very long. Have you been through a formative experience of that kind? Usually it's not a one-day thing, but it's a longer process. Obviously, falling apart and putting yourself together takes a bit of time. So it might have been a course, it might have been a challenge that you had to face, it might have been spending time and dealing with something you hadn't dealt with before. Can you think for a moment and again, just share it with the person next to you? If you turn around, there's someone behind you. Yeah. And to remind you, it can be ghosts, it can be people too. Yeah, if you, the ghosts behind. Thank you. I'm sorry if I killed the conversation, but it's difficult to decide. Again, it seems like there's quite a lot to share, and I hope you have a chance to do that still. Right, so let's put that on the tree. In a minute, I would like to share one more conceptual sort of way of looking at this that I find useful, and I hope you find it useful too. Adrian Underhill many years ago came up with two kinds of development, and he called one horizontal development and the other vertical development. Now, this distinction means that in some ways we all start with horizontal. We collect techniques, we learn about teaching, we learn the language. Very often, part of that horizontal development is also the way we have been taught. And that's not always good. So we kind of absorb a particular way which filters into the way we teach as we start teaching. Techniques, activities, knowledge, habits of teaching. And that's very important. It's very, very important, but by itself, that is not enough. So he says over time, we need to move beyond horizontal and into what he calls vertical development. And that's really about beliefs, assumptions, attitudes. Why do I assess the students the way I do? So it's interesting, you can see the shift now with many teachers as gamification is coming in as a different way of looking at alternative forms of assessment. Now that's a big shift. And it's not everybody's cup of tea, but the key thing is, unless you have an attitudinal change, you will not be good at doing it. And your students will not be, you know, they will not like it and will not work for you. In the same way, if you believe that in a class or with your students, you should always speak Chinese, and there's a good reason, but if there's maybe there's reasons when you shouldn't. Okay, so these are things that go beyond the level of knowledge that you acquired and go much deeper at the essence of what you believe about teaching and learning. And he calls that vertical development. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Assumptions, attitudes, beliefs, and values. It goes in the direction also of what I said about experience. If you just experience teaching, but you don't reflect on what underlies your teaching, ideas, your style, probably you're not going to develop much in terms of vertical over time. Here we are. So we've got two parts of the tree already. It's interesting that I think we think of trees very often. We know there are woods and forests, but we think of trees very much as a tree. But even one or two trees are not alone. They are connected. There's a wonderful book by a German, Peter Vorleben, The Secret Life of Trees. It had been translated into English, and I really recommend it. It's part of the list that I'll share with you at the end. So The Secret Life of Trees looks at what a tree is, how trees communicate, because they communicate. So they're not freestanding individuals, but what he said, they are kind of connected through a wood wide web. I like that. Okay, and that means there's a network where they actually nourish each other. They don't just take it away. They actually do nourish each other. There's a warning system that goes through that network if there are beetles and other nasties that are a threat to the trees. Apparently, they scream at a subsonic level. In other words, when there's too much water level, there's a certain vibration that can be measured. Okay? And they need to sleep. Okay, you see the connection. When we see leaves going down, actually is what he says is that they're entering a kind of hibernation. They minimize their intake, they rest because they need to before they can flourish again in the spring. So clearly, if taking that back to who we are as teachers, it is important who we are with. I personally have been very lucky. I've been living in Hungary now for, gosh, 27 years. And I've not changed my department. The department name has changed. You know, there's change you cannot control, so there you go. But the Center for English Teacher Training started in 1990. I joined them shortly after. And later we became, and we are, the Department of English Language Pedagogy. And I think this is from our website. You can already see that there is a community. And it's a community in many ways, and we're happy to share what we know. We don't necessarily compete. We have up on the 4th floor a sign that says people at DELP, meaning there are people here, not researchers only or teachers. We have a choir. And of course, I sing in that choir. It's a small choir every Tuesday, minus the pandemic, we meet for a short time and we sing for our students on certain occasions. So there is a living community, a support community as well. And I have found that this is our, by the way, our plant, our signature plant, a cactus. You need to be a cactus in university, don't you, to survive. And so this community has been sustaining me for a long time. And it's one of the reasons why I'm still here. Nothing against ELTA, but that's my community. Okay. But then there's a wider community of English teachers, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, IATEFL, and we are an associate, IATEFL Hungary. Okay. And that too, that is my wider community, because there I'm amongst school teachers and colleagues from other universities. And apart from a yearly conference, and we just had our first face-to-face conference again, and everybody was so happy to see each other. We have, because we're an associate, we can also go for free to conferences across the border. So Slovenia, so I've just been to Slovenia in March and came back with COVID. Because we were hugging each other and seeing each other, so a bit of a joke, but I'm fine. We have what's called a winter warmer, one-day conference in January. The other one is a three-day conference. We have our own publications. We have a creative cafe where teachers come together. We have our own journal, Melting Pot, ERT. And we have a more sort of professional, more serious write-up of conference presentations that are always edited after each conference. That is a very important part of my network as well, because over time, I meet these people. I get a lot of energy and inspiration from them, always new ideas. I come back very tired after any of these events, but always full of excitement and energy. And we'll see if that works. I have a very short clip where some teachers who went to the big IATEFL conference in the UK are talking about what has helped them to develop. And we'll see if it plays well enough. So what has helped you as a teacher to develop as a teacher? So let's see if we can listen to them. It's just a minute or so. And then if the sound is there. Do we get the sound?
As a young teacher first, and now that I'm a bit older too, yes, we share lots of moments.
The most important resource for
I guess it's sharing time with colleagues. I mean, I guess the most important thing for me ever since I graduated was working in a private school of English where we share everything, planning and discussions about the learners. And that was really what helped me develop as a young teacher first, and now that I'm a bit older too. Yes, we share lots of moments.
The most important resource for me had been the BBC English language teaching programs in the villages, because I didn't have the access to go to the British Council and meet with the native speakers. But the only voice that I could hear was the BBC with the native speakers.
If the teacher says that I'm well qualified enough, I think that he should retire or should stop, because the main thing is to be always on the edge, to try to find something new.
I had an opportunity to work with Nepal English Language Teachers Association and the British Council and the American Center, and they gave me the real feel of the English language and culture, and that helped me to learn a lot and develop my career as an English language teacher.
nowadays it has become much easier to do this than like, let's say 10, 15 years ago, because there are all these new things such as, well, not quite new, but let's say Twitter, the internet, websites, and the blogs and wikis, and all these things that help you to stay connected and, well, improve both in your profession and stay tuned to what is going on.
There's always something new to discover, and at these conferences, it's a very particular buzz that is difficult to describe, and it's close to the way trees communicate, beyond picking up ideas and activities. It's a very special energy. Now, my question is, do you have an associate? Do you have an inspirational community, a professional community around you? If not, should there be? Teachers of Chinese. Can you have a quick talk? I just wonder, is there such a thing? Maybe you could start with a smaller community where you are now. Does that feel like a community where you teach? And if so, what makes it a community? And if you think wider, should there be, or is there something that you draw inspiration from? So take a minute to talk. Maybe that was too short. Hi. Okay. Okay. I was talking about formative experiences and the fact that they're very powerful. They usually take a little longer to have the impact that they do have. Now, there's one more area where I feel, as I said at the beginning, that is underrated in terms of development potential. And I would call that transformational moments. So, 6 + 1 + 3 can be 30. 6 years of training, 1 year of practice, 3 years of beginner teaching. If there are certain incidents or moments that are just like, was it an epiphany in English? Like you see the light. It doesn't have to be a big light. It can be a small light, but a very important light related to your students, to yourself, to your practice. And the reason why that's important is if you see that moment, if you feel it, then in terms of experiential learning, there is a fantastic opportunity. So if we use Kolb's experiential learning cycle, there is the concrete experience of something that you undergo. And if you pay attention to that moment and you have a chance maybe to write it down or talk to someone about it, maybe share it at a conference, there's an enormous development potential, this Entwicklungssprung, developmental leap that can take you years in your professional and personal development. Because you learn, you pay attention, you observe, you draw conclusions. It doesn't have to be very formal, but it feeds into the next part of your tinkering, active experimentation, a new way of looking at your students or yourself. Just before the pandemic struck, we had a conference here which which highlighted the importance of such transformational moments, because the people you see here at the top were at the conference, and they're all either beginner teachers, trainees, or early career teachers. And there were the oldies like me, and we also gave presentations. But these guys, they blew everyone away. And they blew everyone away because they talked about transformational moments, such moments that went through, and they were so fresh and so insightful that we felt very happy as teacher trainers and a little envious too. Okay. There's a link to the publication which you can find online. So if you want to read some of the stories, I just brought you one example to show what I mean by transformational moments, so you have a quiet read. Now, if you're a seasoned teacher, patience doesn't sound like much, but I know Peter quite well, and to see the change from someone who's almost shaking because they have a notion in their head that they cannot reach, and that actually is not important, to somebody who lets go, even though they're prepared, and how that translates into much better teaching, that is the revelation. It was one for him. And just to see him talk about this with such clarity, and many of the others, was inspirational. So we called it Inspirational Stories of Teacher Development. And they are all about a day, a class, a short moment sometimes of insight that propelled them forward. So, gosh, we've been sitting all this time. Let's do this differently. I'd like you to think about this as well. Has there been a transformational moment ever for you? Don't know how recently or if ever, when it was, in your teaching. So it would be in your practice, okay? What happened and why do you think it touched you or influenced you very much? And I'd like you to stand up for this. So we have a stretch break and you can turn around and talk as you stand. I think it'll be good for you because there's so much sitting coming. So feel free to stand up, turn around, talk for a moment. Just stretch. They can see me. Wow, what a mess. Well, I take that to be a good sign. And I hope you enjoyed the moment of stretching, never mind transformational moments. Okay, we're getting to the end, to the top of the tree, just to give you a little bit of something to look forward to. Unforeseen challenges. A colleague in Slovenia wrote this in an article which I liked. She wrote, if someone had asked me a year ago what I thought about working from home in my pajamas, in my pajama bottoms, I would have laughed in their face and said, bring it on, endless weekends. Yeah. Are you kidding me? That's a dream come true, she wrote. However, we all know the saying, be careful what you wish for, because it may just come true. And so it has. So we've all gone through this pandemic. Well, I'm not sure we've gone through it fully. It's still around. But at least for the time being, we have a little bit of a breather. So I'm just saying that this was an unwelcome and unforeseen challenge, I think, for many of us. And everybody in Hungary and all the language teachers I know were struggling to meet that challenge in the best they could. And I'm pretty sure you did too. So at the same time, speaking for myself here, and actually also for many of my colleagues that I know and was in touch with all this time, the fact that we had to do a lot of horizontal development. Just, you know, Zoom, I didn't know Zoom, I didn't know Zoom existed. Teams, then all these platforms started competing with each other. University was trying to decide which one to use to allow. Then these apps mushrooming. And I would say, and that was very important, horizontal development, just finding my way, learning patience. You know, after a while, I learned, and that already became almost vertical development. If it's slow, nobody dies. If I mess up the app, the students will wait. But initially, I was just jittering, worried, stiff. So, but then something else happened, which I want to share from the point of view of vertical development. And it's not to do with the online mode in terms of apps and things, but with something that has been called virtual relating. Because, and I have a hunch that's probably true for you too, if you taught online, that, you know, students were not ready to be taught. I mean, they was worried sick about somebody having the virus or somebody getting the virus or them having to move out of their student dorms back to their parents. The whole world was sort of upside down. And then you come in and say, okay, now let's teach. Or let's train, and so I started rethinking planning entirely. So all my classes started with about 5 to 7 minutes of virtual relating, using these pictures, just saying, use the chat, put in a number, which one are you? Tricky, because, you know, some people did write 7 or 2. So sometimes I said, do you want to talk about it? Or let me send you to a breakout room if there were 5 of them and talk a little bit so that when they come back, there's attention, there's a sense of a cathartic relief of some kind, so they're ready to learn. In the same way, you know, 90-minute class, come on. You know, you can already feel what that's like here. And I think if you've done 90 minutes online, you're drained. There's many things that are going well, not good. So I put in a little slot of yoga in the middle of a 90-minute class. So that wasn't teaching in the sense of teaching English or training, but it was a very important part of relating. And for me, that was, if you want, that was vertical development, to say it's not as important, or I can't actually teach if I don't do something like this. Okay. So yeah. So what I'm saying is actually a message of hope a little bit, that when a challenge comes, and as I said, most of them are unannounced and unwelcome, to kind of step back and say, okay, fine, you're here now. And maybe initially, you know, there's a panic zone. We're saying, okay, but I'm not going to panic. I'm going to look around, maybe fall back on my network, look to get support where I need it, so that I get into a learning zone. And we can do that. It takes a little bit of self-control and, as I say, ideally the support of others, as we did in our department, you know, quickly sharing ways of dealing with, somebody was good at Teams. I got quite good with Zoom because I used it a lot. Others were just students, brilliant in using the apps. I had no idea what was out there, okay? And actually that's the network of trees. We were all thirsty for something. We didn't quite know what it was, but we needed that support in finding out what we could do to meet that challenge. Right. So unforeseen challenges are almost at the top of the tree. And I'm not going to ask you now what your challenges were. I'm not going to send you back. I trust you've had your own, and you might want to think about how you handled them. But I am saying that any one such challenge is an opportunity for moving yourself forward professionally. Finally, reading the signs. Well, I think I said that at the beginning. People like trees need nourishment. They need the right climate to develop. If they don't get that for long, I mean, look at that image. I already feel sorry for that tree. They will not thrive or develop. Maybe they remain stunted. They might survive, you know, but they grow like bonsai to sort of little, strange little thing. And you need to read the signs. And teachers, as I've just said, how do you know, you know, somebody's a teacher who starts out here, beginning to fade, and you can sometimes hear it in the voice, you see it in the face, but that teacher will still march on. How do you recognize a teacher? Right? Now, the sad thing is, and that's a new development in teacher development, is the burnout that some teachers have starts a lot earlier, and the overload that our beginner teachers and also our early career teachers are experiencing means that very many actually stop teaching after 3 or 4 years. Money is an issue, but more than that, they feel the school climate very often is not right for them. There's pressure to get more qualifications. There's a particular system in Hungary where you have to get a portfolio, so otherwise you don't move into a new career path. So this is actually an interesting blog for those of you who are Hungarian, where the writer, who is a beginner teacher, even as she was training, was beginning to feel, I'm already overloaded. What's it going to be like? You know, and I want to buy a flat or have a flat or have a family. When do I do that? Okay, so I can only hope that your situation is different, wherever you might be. But this is what she wrote here. So reaching both from the beginner level up to experienced teachers, very much experiencing very similar things. So maybe this does mean a number of things. Maybe it does mean if the school where you are, or the place where you are is toxic, and there are some, you need to leave it. You know, very often the teachers will say, oh, but I can't leave my students. You know, they love me, I love them, they need me. Well, they might, but they won't get the best of you. They will get less and less of you if something doesn't change. And if you have no control over it, maybe then you need to make a move. Rangan Chatterjee and put this really nicely visually, and I love that. So basically, optimal health is at the bottom of this, and we only start noticing when the signals are at the top. In other words, you know, when we start being unwell as teachers, overworked, not well emotionally, the signs of that this is wrong, the body signals start a lot earlier, but we will only start paying attention when it's close to some form of disease or some form of breakdown. Okay, so we need to start looking at the signals a lot earlier before they become more dramatic. Well, how do you do that? I don't know. What I do is this, you know. Well, with my students, with the classes, for myself, I have to have different routines. I'm no longer 6, you know, I'm 61. So I don't have endless amounts of energy. So I need to be really conscious of where do I get the energy from? I need to pay attention to getting a different kind of energy. That's me now, all right? Not quite mile long, but I still get inspired, and I have to put in physical exercise of the kind that is good for me. So I don't know what that might mean for you, but I would say that if you don't, find something that allows you to not just be a teacher, but be a person, and use all of your body in a way that nourishes you and sustains you. So let me finish with a last look at our tree. Yeah. And let me finish with just a quick summary of the do's that I'd like to leave you with. Revisit your roots, okay? So think about, again, your strengths, your values, your signature characteristics, and how they have or how they might influence the way you teach, the way you feel as a professional. You don't have to wait, you don't have to expect to wait years and years and then you develop. There will be opportunities if you look for developmental leaps. And related to that, sometimes they come when you say, I'm going to do something completely different now. just see what happens, see how the students respond. Sometimes if it goes terribly wrong, there'll be some learning in there as well. But take that kind of courage, and that might take you forward in a way that you hadn't quite expected. If you haven't got one, do look for a professional community. Being solitary as a teacher is one of the worst bits in our profession. Almost doesn't matter, you know, if you're freelancing, it's very lonely. If you're a private teacher, and sometimes you can be very lonely in the community of teachers. That's not good for you. So find one that is. And also, what you have to say and report is interesting. Don't think it's not. It is. Sometimes parents, you know, people just don't know what teachers do. You know, and they might see you differently. Colleagues will relate to you anyway. They will understand. But also feel free to talk about, to share a story, and don't be worried about boring people. You won't. We have things to say, and they should be told. And maybe also take the courage to share it at a conference. It doesn't have to be high flying. The point is that it's a way of getting into what's in your head anyway, processing it and making it accessible to others as well as yourself. Take care and read the signs. Okay. Nothing else to add. The signs are there. Thanks for staying with me, and have a good conference.
Thank you to Dr. Uwe Pohl for this very engaging and interesting workshop. We have a little bit of time for questions. If you have any question, you can hands up, and I'm sure Dr. Uwe Pohl will be happy to answer.
But only briefly, because you need a break.
Yeah.
But if anybody has a question, here's a moment.
Yeah, grab the moment.
Or if not, just, yeah.
Please.
First of all, just very interesting to see, you know, about yourself. Obviously, about 60 years old. When did that happen? And also mentioned about the training you have one for European members of Parliament from 60. What was that? And what was it? So where was it?
Oh dear. Well, that would take another 15 minutes.
Okay.
But I'm happy to talk to you in a minute. Just frankly, I would say, I mean, becoming a teacher I had two sources. One was table tennis, because when I was 16, I was asked to coach the little ones. And I said, I'm not a teacher. I don't know how to do that. They said, well, just show them. And then I did it, and I enjoyed it. I thought, wow, this is cool. You know, I can show them the moves, and I could see how they were learning. And that's the first time I actually started thinking, teacher, maybe, why not? And then I loved English. I fell in love with the English language early on, and I was rather good at it. Even East Germany, where I was born. So I listened to the radio. I wanted to play all my heroes on the guitar. And so when my English was really good by the time I was at secondary school, and then my English teachers were also very good ghosts, said, you know, why don't you become an English teacher? And I said, well, yeah, teacher, maybe English, do you think? So that was the beginning of and I never left the route. Okay. And the other things I'm happy to talk to you about personally. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dow, for the question. Yeah. Okay, then I think we are all dismissed, and we should come back at 4. Yeah. Okay. See you.